From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back to the library, crypto miner and malware found hidden inside NPM libraries. Then, nearly all U.S. execs have experienced a cybersecurity threat, but some say there's still no plan. That's truly scary. And it's just in time for spooky season. Microsoft reports on SolarWinds Group, Nobelium. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's Cybersecurity Headlines. Now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Jason Fruget, the CISO at Rent-A-Center. Jason, thanks so much for being here.
Super happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. We, of course, want to thank our sponsor, Banyan Security. We'll be talking about them later on and thank them for making this show possible. And remember, you can join us on LinkedIn Live. Just going over to the CISO series account on LinkedIn, and you can find all of that goodness. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump right in. Crypto miner and malware found hidden inside NPM libraries. Sonatype has uncovered crypto mining malware hidden inside 3 JavaScript libraries uploaded on the official NPM package repository. Disguised as user agent string parsers, these can detect a user's operating system and then download crypto mining instructions based on that. In a related but separate story, a critical severity advisory was posted on GitHub last Friday and mentioned in CISA's website, warning of embedded malware in 3 versions of the UA parser-is, which is used in apps and websites to discover the type of device or browser a person is using. So I guess content-aware malware, always wonderful. So Jason, kind of 2 similar incidents here. What's the significance of NPM libraries being used like this? Not the first time we've kind of seen malware and kind of more insidious stuff tied to those.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in this case, right, NPM is the package manager used to update these Java library updates are not done frequently. So this, fortunately, was detected quickly. It was less than a day that these infected files were out there, and only about 150 files were downloaded. So not too big of an impact, thank goodness. It's also interesting looking at how this particular exploit works. Like we see this very often where the malicious file, before it executes its payload, it does a scan to see if there's a Cyrillic keyboard installed, for example. And that would indicate that system is either in Russia or the Ukraine or Kazakhstan. And if it's there, if it's in that Eastern European region, it doesn't execute the payload. And so it does that, for reasons that where they don't want to get, retaliation from that government. So it's interesting. It seems like something that can easily be evaded with that old trick in the keyboard.
Yeah, the power of keyboards compels us all for NPM. But I mean, this kind of just feeds into this overall, like, hey, we need to be aware of our software supply chains, more than ever, right?
100%, completely agree.
All right. Next up, Facebook sues Ukrainian who scraped the data of 178 million users. Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, alleges that the hacker abused a feature of Facebook Messenger called Contact Importer, which allows users to synchronize their phone address books to find friends. He used an automated tool to pose as Android devices in order to feed Facebook servers with millions of random phone numbers. As Facebook servers returned information for which phone numbers had an account on the site, the hacker collected the data, which he later offered for sale on raid forums. Seems like kind of a bigger on Facebook's part. This is not the first thing we've kind of headline we've seen that where this system has gotten Facebook into more than a little bit of trouble. Jason, what's your take?
Well, you're 100% right. It's not the first time this exact thing happened. And it really doesn't seem to me like it's worthy of a lawsuit. I feel like the lawsuit might be an attempt to spin the narrative because, this is a person who recognized a user scenario where they could harvest data by making the application do what it was designed to do. It's not like they hacked the application. They didn't do anything malicious. And at the end of the day, the value of this data seems so hard to quantify. I mean, basically what he was able to do is provide whoever buys this data with information that says this phone number is associated with a Facebook account. And that's it. It doesn't give you any correlation to whose Facebook account or anything like that. Seems very low value. Not sure this lawsuit makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of like social engineering fodder that's like, I don't want out there for anyone to find, but the value, like you have to put a lot of effort seemingly into that to get anything out of it. And this definitely seems like part of that as well.
Absolutely.
All right, next up here, Black Matter ransomware victims quietly helped using secret decryptor. Soon after the Black Matter ransomware operation launched, Emsisoft discovered a flaw allowing them to create a decryptor recovery tool for victims' files. Emsisoft immediately alerted law enforcement and trusted partners with information about the decryptor, choosing to keep things quiet so as not to alert ransomware gangs to these flaws. This seems like a little bit of a trend here. It's like, hey, we've found this, we're going to be quiet about it, not talk about it. Is there any kind of, I don't even want to call it an ethical discussion, but the practicality of, hey, we can help a smaller group of people a lot versus help everybody a little if we scream at the top of our lungs about this? I'm curious about your thoughts, Jason.
I think that's a very fair observation. It's interesting, what's kind of going on here in the psychology behind it. I mean, the more obvious or the more public they are about the existence of this backdoor decryptor, the faster that the ransomware service will close it down and close down that hole. So I understand why they're motivated to do that. What's interesting is that the emerging trend with ransomware today, right, is first, before the ransomware executes its payload and encrypts the data, it actually steals data, right? So it steals any sensitive data. And it does that for, to make the company pay the ransom for now two reasons. One, to decrypt the data, but second, to avoid a breach disclosure. Because they say, if you don't pay us, we're going to just make this information public, and now you've got to deal with the fallout of that. And so in this case, they were very lucky that this particular ransomware didn't have that exfiltration component. So this decryptor, it worked because it solved the problem completely. I think ransomware generally, I'll just say, I think it's a problem that governments need to step in and solve with some policy. As I mentioned in the last article, these things do geolocation scans. They look to see if there's a Cyrillic keyboard, right? Is this Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan? Is there a presence from Eastern Europe that might cause us trouble? And if there is, the ransomware service avoids that market. It's the countries that aren't involved in that sort of retaliation policy that are most vulnerable. But if we're not going to get a policy treatment like that, what I predict is that, like in Microsoft's decryptor, I think in the future we're going to find individuals out there who are going to do what Microsoft did, but they're going to create a gray market, and they're going to offer ransomware victims a cheaper way to decrypt their files. And it's just going to get kind of weird with this gray market thing happening. So I guess I'm just going to keep watching and see how this develops.
And we'll definitely be covering as the ransomware situation continues to evolve, and it's got a lot of twists and turns. There's going to be a lot of great history and economics PhDs out of the last 5 years for sure. Next up here, Microsoft reports on Nobelium. Speaking of malicious actors, Microsoft announced that the Nobelium threat group, previously behind the SolarWinds supply chain attack, has breached at least 14 managed service and cloud providers since May 2021. Microsoft said 609 customers were notified of over 23,000 attacks between July and October by the group. To put the scale of this activity into context, Microsoft said that this is more than all of the notifications about attacks from state-affiliated groups like Nobelium it sent to customers in the 3 years prior to July 2021. Nobelium, the kind of attacks they're doing seem to have kind of like a relatively low success rate, but they're making steady progress, and clearly they're hitting a lot of high-profile customers. Should we be worried, Jason?
Well, yeah, I think there's two things notable about this. First, Nobelium, and that's just another name for the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, by the way. And they're attacking, they're doing something uncommon, right? They're attacking service providers inside of the cloud. So they're kind of shifting left in the way they're attacking. So that makes this unique. But what isn't unique is the type of attacks. I mean, these are common attacks, known old issues. I think the reason that this spray and pray kind of attack model isn't more effective is because most cloud service providers are using more modern technology that just happen to have been written, in less vulnerable ways because it's more current. I think they're reaching out and they're getting low-hanging fruit, and this is business as usual. I think if anything, people who operate in the cloud might look at this and see it as another reason to really look at the development practices and security maintenance practices of the service providers themselves.
All right, before we move on here, I want to thank our sponsor, Banyan Security. Today, 75% of enterprises are using some form of hybrid cloud deployment. Unfortunately, traditional network-centric security solutions like VPNs are not designed to meet the scale, performance, and usability needs of modern organizations, especially those with dynamic hybrid and multi-cloud environments. Replace your traditional network access boxes, VPNs, bastion hosts, and gateways with a cloud-based zero-trust remote access solution and enable a safe and reliable work-from-anywhere environment. Visit banyansecurity.io for more information. All right, our next story here. Healthcare organizations struggle with breaches. Not exactly new, but we got some specifics here from a really interesting report. It comes from the Ponemon Institute and SecureLink, and they found that in the last 12 months, 44% of healthcare organizations surveyed have experienced a data breach caused by a third party. Not necessarily even malicious, just a third party was involved. Part of the problem comes from the fact that these organizations are not equipped to properly monitor third parties just for simple access controls for internal or external kind of parties that are accessing data. Jason, healthcare seems to be a prime target for all types of cybercrime, and it can't be made any easier when you have data breaches. It was seemingly suffered by half of organizations. Should hospitals and other healthcare organizations be forced or encouraged, some sort of regulatory situation to up their security game more than a little?
I do think so. Yes. It's funny. I'm not surprised by this first because as healthcare organizations have become more reliant on technology to deliver their services, they've invested heavily there, but they haven't necessarily kept pace investing in security. And so I don't know if the hackers target healthcare more or if they're just more successful when they do. But it is terrible for us as patients because it used to be just the medical record data that was vulnerable, but more and more we're seeing that the healthcare outcomes for the patients themselves are becoming more at risk. So these consequences are become more material and more serious. And so I do think that the need for additional countermeasures is being recognized in the healthcare space, and it will improve.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen. I would consider like HIPAA and those kind of laws to have been successful in terms of patient record privacy and that kind of stuff, pretty broadly followed across the board. At least you would hope so. I feel like there has to be some sort of way we can approach that. And again, I have all the sympathy in the world for your individual IT admin who doesn't have the tools and can't build this from the ground up. But this is something we have to think about, I think, holistically, right?
100%. Absolutely.
All right. Next up here, Iranian gas stations out of service after a cyber attack. The National Iranian Oil Products Distribution Company, catchy name, operates a network of more than 3,500 gas stations across Iran and saw gas station operations come to a halt this week due to a cyber attack. At the same time, a string of hacks on electronic road billboards displayed messages demanding an explanation or asking for fuel. Interesting twist there. I mean, already kind of a big deal. 3,500 gas stations shut down because of a hack. Do you think these two items could be coming from the same source, or it seems too suspicious not to be, right?
I don't know. It's a good question. I kind of think it's not, though. I think that what happened is you've got someone who hit infrastructure in a way that was so disruptive that it caused some other folks to compound the problem by hacking these billboards and causing they had Al Khamenei's phone number, right, posted on a billboard. Another billboard was saying, "Hey, go to this different area to get free fuel." So they're kind of messing with traffic and just creating chaos. Very interesting, and there's lessons learned, I think, for both folks, because certainly now that people know how to get get into those billboards and what they can do when they're in there. I don't think that this is going to be limited to gas station problems. I hope that this company that runs these billboards took notice at the independent kind of chaos that they alone can cause, whether it's gas stations or something else being breached.
What are the odds that those billboards are just like a white box solution, and that exploit works on like 10% or like 50% of U.S. billboards as well? I'm willing to bet that's like guaranteed, right?
Yeah, and you're seeing more and more of those billboards right across the interstate too, in a lot of places. So it's an interesting. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to think about what you could do.
Yeah, for sure. Next up here, a researcher cracked 70% of sampled Wi-Fi networks. A CyberArk researcher has managed to crack 70% of 5,000 Wi-Fi network samples in his hometown of Tel Aviv. The researcher roamed the city armed with a $50 network card and a freeware sniffing setup comprised of Wireshark on Ubuntu Wi-Fi to gather hashes, and then exploited a flaw that allowed the retrieval of the PMKID hash. So we got all the specifics there. Using a standard laptop and a dictionary attack using the RockU dictionary file, the researcher cracked 3,359 passwords out of those 5,000, many of which were set to the user's cell phone number or just to a weak password comprised of only lowercase characters. This kind of ties into another story we covered this week about home workers, half of home workers potentially using unsecured technology. And it's kind of a continued theme that we've seen as work from home has continued. It's obvious people aren't getting the message or don't care. I mean, what's the next step? A non all lowercase a dictionary word is like table stakes password etiquette, right?
Yeah, and it's it's interesting. This was like in Tel Aviv, but I think this same problem is an everywhere problem, and at any scale, you're going to have the same percentages, and it comes down to right convenience. I have a very difficult network password for my Wi-Fi at my house, and anytime someone who's never been to my house comes over and they ask to get on the Wi-Fi, it's like sure. And I pull, I unscroll my password, my 15 character, uppercase, lowercase numbers and letters, and I show it to them, and you see the look of exhaustion, and they're like, "This is going to take 20 minutes to type this into my phone." Uh, and I think that's why people, right? They say, well, that's just that person's phone, but what about like my Wi-Fi boxes, my smart, Internet of Things? I got to type this in all the time. I never want to change this password because it's so much trouble. With my iPhone, what's kind of fun is if a new guest comes over and they try to connect to it, I can just push a button and share the password. But anytime they're using any non-iPhone device, then they have to manually put it in. And for that reason, it's very tempting to create a very weak password and just live with that, right? And I think until we have a technological solution that addresses that convenience issue across all the different technologies, we're going to continue to see weak passwords here.
I also feel like that is also a failure of like network design in a weird way that like I do like the way that Apple has implemented that, and that they don't see the password, they don't have access to it. But then, if they're a trusted party, okay, you're good. It's kind of like giving like a one-time like door unlock password or something like that. I know there are guests. I mean, this is just for personal stuff. Obviously, this doesn't apply really to the enterprise where you have all sorts of crazy VLANs and stuff set up. But for like that guest Wi-Fi situation where it's like, oh, I'm shunned to this home network that's really slow or something like that. I also feel like there's a design challenge there on that needs a technical solution as well to kind of like not solve the situation, but make it less inconvenient to be secure. I know there's always that spectrum, but it feels like there's something there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. And finally here, nearly all U.S. execs have experienced a cybersecurity threat, but some say there's still no plan. On Tuesday, Deloitte published the results of a new survey, some might call terrifying, which suggests that 98% of U.S. executives have come across at least one cybersecurity event over the past year. Not too surprising with those metrics, but of interest in the report is that rather than malware, phishing, or data breaches being a top concern, 27% of executives said they were most worried about the actions of well-meaning employees who may inadvertently create avenues for attackers to exploit. So, Jason, does this sound like careful analysis, or are we seeing like senior leaders, hey, here's an easy victim, let me just chuck them under the bus here? I mean, I know insider threats, a major security concern, but that's not what this exactly sounds like, right?
No, and actually, I think this is rather than being opportunistic, I think it's actually really insightful. I mean, we know, right, just looking at the data, the overwhelming majority of data lost in security incidents are user error. It's accidental, right? Employees accidentally send sensitive data to the wrong email recipient or something like that. I heard a quote not too long ago, and I think it sums up the challenge that we face quite easily, which is that every attacker wants access and every employee has it. And I think it's just so poignant. This isn't to say that we should ignore technical countermeasures like ransomware, malware, and other vulnerability exploit types. Those things are important, and we need to continue to invest in them. But I think there's a big takeaway here that can't be ignored. Two of them. First, basically every executive everywhere in the world has seen a cyber incident recently, and they're noticing a pattern of user-initiated problems that are causing them. And the second is that the value of a strong security awareness program goes a long way, not just in terms of effectively reducing security problems by helping people avoid those accidents, but it also, it makes sure that when you talk about a security program to those executives that see this pattern, they maintain confidence that the CISO is focusing efforts and dollars where it matters the most. Right? So it's not just technical controls, it's an awareness thing. I remember about a decade ago, I read a report that stuck with me. I'll never forget it. And one of the outcomes was that employees are more likely to steal intellectual property data than they are to steal office supplies.
Wow.
And thinking about that, it's clear the inference is right. They understood office supplies had a real tangible value. And as far as they're concerned, data is not valuable. And I think we're seeing that shift. That was about a 10-year-old report. But whenever I'm working on any security awareness campaign, I always think about that in my mind and look at that with the optics that we've got to make sure every employee understands that the data they're dealing with might be the most valuable thing in that company, and they're the first line of defense when it comes to protecting it. So that'd be my thoughts there.
That is a super great way to get us out of here. Before we finish up the show, Jason, was there any particular story that stood out to you, was a favorite?
I actually had two. I think the billboards being hacked. That brings out the 15-year-old version of me who has all these ideas. I even saw we had a comment from the audience that talked about placing the word zombies on the sign. Kurt Ma's Center for Internet Security Experts expect zombies on the overhead road signs. I'm having a blast in my head thinking about the potential. But on a more serious note, I do think that the best article was the one about the Deloitte report and the executives' perspective on security breaches. I think there's such a practical benefit for CISOs to reflect on their priorities and the messaging they have to their board in light of that, because that really does show the perception of most executives about where the problems are.
All right, and people, Jason, where can the good audience find you if they're so inclined to check you out?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Just J for J on LinkedIn, and on Twitter at Jason Frugier, all one word.
Thank you so much, Jason Frugier, the CISO at Rent-A-Center. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, Banyan Security. You can come back next week for our Friday video chat, hacking, asset management, an hour of critical thinking about figuring out what you have at all times. That starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, followed by a meetup. And then our live content extravaganza every Friday continues with another edition of the Week in Review, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Remember, of course, you can get cybersecurity headlines every single day in your podcast app of choice. That's about 6 minutes to get you all caught up on all of the details. You can check those all out, CISOseries.com. Until then, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.